at St. John's before, and he is the director of the Office of Human Rights in the Montgomery County government. And before that, though, Jim had a very long career in human rights and civil rights, working across the board on issues from immigrants and refugees to promoting diversity in communities, to Holocaust education, to human trafficking. It's an incredibly broad experience and depth of experience. But this morning, Jim, as you know, we've invited you to talk with us about the fourth pillar of biblical justice in our six-part series looking at the six pillars of biblical justice and how they relate to racial equity. And the first three, just as a reminder to everyone, the first was shalom for all. It's God's intention that everyone have abundant life and can thrive. The second pillar is that no one is innocent, meaning we're all implicated in oppression. And the third is no one is beyond redemption, meaning that we can all change. And the fourth pillar is an uncompromising focus on the marginalized. And there's nothing that Jesus' life exhibited better than his focus on the marginalized and the oppressed, standing with them for justice. So this morning, we've asked Jim to comment on that from his perspective, including the current work that's going on in Montgomery County and developments in our country. And perhaps, Jim, give us some uncompromising ideas about things we can do to help make a difference. I know that you've also commented that, you know, our country is undergoing a huge change, that by 2050 we'll have a whole demographic landscape, that we have a great deal of work to do before we get there so that we can all live together. I know that we're also asking ourselves if Montgomery County is mature enough to be able to grapple with this, because when it comes down to questions of resources and targeting them to where the greatest need is, I think there's probably a lot of work we have to do in order to do that in a mature fashion also. But I invite you to address us starting wherever you would like to start, and you can speak for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A and discussion. So
Great.
Welcome again, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Really appreciate it very much, Ann, and to the leadership of St. John's, Pastor, and is it Ateek? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Pastor Ateek, and then Lisa, thank you again, and certainly your role as junior warden, all you do for St. John's, and really appreciate your outreach to me. And so thank you, every single one of you, for this opportunity to be with you this morning. I want to first of all applaud the efforts of St. John's and what you have really engaged in terms of this 12-week journey. I think that the idea that you're going to be committing yourselves to the focus of racial justice, racial equity and social justice is certainly commendable. And your sixth area of focus that Ann just talked about, really, again, very impressive. And certainly hopeful that it'll move you to wherever it is that you're trying to get to. And I really like the concept that Ann shared with me, and Lisa as well, about on and off ramps. And many of you are at places where you're trying to kind of figure out what may be your own ramp to these issues and to this journey. And everyone is not at the same place in that journey. I'm aware of that as well. And for whatever reason, whatever you bring to it or come to this particular point in time in history, in your faith walk, in your walk in the community, all of those things line up with your decision making about when you will, in fact, engage more completely, if you have not already done so, on this journey. So I've been asked, as indicated by Ann, and thank you again for the introduction. I really appreciate that. I am talking to you this morning, and I hope sharing as well with you this morning on the issue of the focus must be on the marginalized. Interesting topic, and one from which I'm going to address in a number of different ways. And so bear with me as we go through this. And if I don't touch something that you want to hear about directly, please, we'll cover that in our Q&A time. These are the questions I guess I was posed, or were posed to me. Who has the least power or advantage in Montgomery County? This in an effort to try to identify who is the marginalized here in our county. Who has the least voice of influence? The fewest resources? Who is oppressed? Looking at poverty, housing, education, or employment, while I am not a demographer, and to truly get a comprehensive answer to these questions, we really need to have someone from Park and Planning come and really break down those numbers for us, to really get behind those answers, to get the data that really supports the answers. But I must tell you, from where I sit, every single category in our community, in terms of the marginalized, is Black and brown people. Population of Montgomery County as of December 2019 is 43.5% white, 20.1% Hispanic LX, 20.1% Black or African American, 15.6% Asian, and the remainder American Indian, Alaskan Native, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians. 36% of our population, ladies and gentlemen, are foreign born, the greatest percentage of which in the DMV. The current percent of persons of color in Montgomery County is 56.5%. And it is estimated by the year 2045, that percentage is slated to move to 73% county of color. Now, I may not see 2045. Now, some of you on this phone may see 2045, but I don't think that's quite in my particular history going forward. But clearly that our children will, and our children's children certainly will. It'll be a very different Montgomery County. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to say to you by way of homework. And actually, I'm going to come back to that. Very important. In looking at this issue of kind of where we are in Montgomery County and around the world, and particularly in light of the killing of Sir George Floyd, and then others since that point in time, two persons whom occurred here in our own county, Montgomery County. I believe that there are 5 keys that I want to certainly have the broader white community embrace. And I'm putting this under the whole category of what the white community should do to bridge the gap on race relations. And so that's the framework that I'll be talking with you on today. And it's offering some thoughts and perspectives on that. Some of which St. John's is already engaged in, and that's great. But maybe it's a chance to rethink that and do more. But what St. John's needs to consider, or may need to consider to embrace on this focus on the marginalized, is to move to a different place on the issue of race and maximize this extraordinary, momentous occasion in our country's history. Now, I'm not offering any kind of detailed analysis or some academic treatise, but these are my own thoughts. And there are 5 basic keys I want to share this morning with you. Listen, learn, acknowledge, engage, take a stand. Listen, learn, acknowledge, engage, take a stand. Listen. Listen. Maybe for the very first time, really listen to a Black person, someone you know, or think you do, or someone you do not admittedly know at all, or at least maybe not well. Someone you feel safe in being courageous enough to ask questions of, and not the surface topics, which generally are the main course of our conversations in and amongst races. Ask the question that you expect will produce answers you may be uncomfortable with. And listen, this is not an academic exercise. This is about human beings seeking understanding from one another, from another human being. So once you ask the question, listen, stay in the moment. Don't think ahead. Become an empty vessel to be filled by their story. While you may be the most liberal in your thinking or pride yourself on how frequently or familiar you are with Black people, you may find out how much you do not know. So I just submit to you, listen for a change. Really listen. Learn. Learn. Learn all you can about the Black experience. From 1607 in this country's founding shores and centuries of history and culture in the continent of Africa. Now, unless you are someone who studied African-American history with meaningful and thoughtful instruction, you may not have ever had or taken the opportunity to learn this history. Now, I know you are engaged in various activities at St. John's, which is fantastic. But it's enormously important. And it's an enormously important story to the birth and historical progress of this nation. Economics, art, science, mathematics, sports, music, poetry, the written word, astrology, business, politics, and the list goes on the contributions to America and to the world. All at the same time being reduced to non-humans at best, 3/5 of a human as part of a political deal in the Constitution of these United States of America. And even today, still not fully reconstituted and made whole to our place of equality and standing. I have spent a lifetime learning about you. There are those who would submit to you that enough of this already. Listen, I'm not a part of the process by which we got here. Wasn't here. Nothing to do with slavery. My folks weren't the kind of people who were engaged in these kinds of activities. And quite frankly, this is enough. I am doing all I can possibly do and ought not be held hostage with this current state and time in our history. I spent a lifetime learning about you. And there'll be someone who may be resentful of all talk about race and Black people and be offended and put off by reading a book, sometimes just one book, about me as a Black man. What a missed opportunity. There are so many resources to fill in the gaps of our knowledge and appreciation of the Black experience. So do some reading. Read also about the pain. Read about the struggle. Read about the inhumanity exposed in the experience as well. All of them tell the story. Acknowledge, acknowledge. Acknowledge and become aware of your white privilege. In many instances, it is unearned and predestined, and all you have to do is be white in America. Not me, you're talking about, Jim Stowe. Well, if you're not part of the system, the question out there for all of us is, have you benefited from it? And even the most fair-minded of you would not exchange your current status with another, less privileged one. Now, this is not a guilt trip. It's just a reality check. When you see the angry young Black man burning it down and being less than productive with his life in your eyes, just think there may be a reason. Well, I believe there is a reason. It very well may mean that another twist, another turn became a barrier that repeatedly prevented him from ever seeking anything beyond it. You see, it sometimes can cloud your thinking and grip on life and have you believe that there are no alternatives except to strike back with anger and violence. And you cry out, not even considering the possibility of going around the barrier to where success may be just out of reach. Now, I'm not talking about woe is me. That's not what this is about. It is just a reality too often experienced in Black America, where your zip code can determine your success or even whether you live or die. Zip codes 20902, 20906, 20907, 20010, 20915, 20886, 20879. In those zip codes in Montgomery County, your well-being is already stamped into your DNA in terms of where you live. And we have health disparities to prove every single angle of our existence in those zip codes. Engage with a Black person or persons. Actually seek out experiences where you may be the only one. And ask yourself a question. Have you ever been the only one? The only woman? The only white person? The only man? You see, I do this all the time in many places across America, and some places right here in our own county. So you see, sometimes in some parts of Bethesda and also Chevy Chase, our populations are still 50 to 70% predominantly white. And these populations have done so and been so because of restrictive kinds of ordinances, protective clauses in development projects. And so much of what those two areas are in our city, in our county, in our townships, to include Poolsville as an example, are much the way they've been since the beginning of their existence. So in that particular setting, I'm saying we got to build relationships and be real clear. You don't have to walk a certain way with a certain pimp or lean or cadence in your walk at all, or talk a certain kind of way. You just do you and be sincere. And by the by, the experience becomes real, but you must commit to it. Be prepared for setbacks, put downs, hurt feelings, and maybe name calling and possibly being taken advantage of. If you're there for the long haul, you will get over it and you'll get through it. I'm speaking from personal experience in growing up in the South and traveling up South to the North. Sincerity does in fact take you a long way. You will never be who I am, nor will I become who you are. But we can, if we want to, still build relationship. It must be authentic and based on a mutual desire to have it be so. 400 years and growing. Your interest in me as a Black man has not ever been a priority or a necessity. We have no idea what a world of human potential that could be unleashed with the two of us and him and her and they and them and we and us, all working together and existing in relationship. Take a stand. Take a stand and let folks know what you believe and why it relates to the issue and how it relates to the issue of race. How you feel about Confederate statues and symbols and honoring those who fought against this country. How you feel about race being a factor in every aspect of life: education, housing, employment, poverty, economic development. The accumulation of wealth for nearly 14% of this country's 233 million people. And when you add our tan and brown sisters and brothers, is well nearly 40% of our population. And by the year 2035, a nation that we know as the United States of America will become minority majority. Be clear, nobody wants to take anything from you. There should be no fear of retaliation, notwithstanding what's being said on the national scene, or some looming brutality that awaits you, that you have to bear arms and parade around with your open weaponry to guard your stuff, your power, or privilege. No need for a loaded revolver, an AR-15 or AK-47, which, by the way, these particular items are flying off gun store shelves and gun show exhibits throughout the DMV. So it ought not, it should rather be an issue. But how you feel about health disparities that have been laid plain by COVID-19 and its crippling grip on all of us, that have really impacted Black and brown communities disproportionately, with brown people having the highest incidence of these viruses in Montgomery County, and Black people having the highest incidence of death due to COVID-19. How you feel about folks saying that if the Blacks would just work hard and get an education, they would have it much better. Black wealth in America has not recovered since Reconstruction. And some suggest the wealth gap between whites and Blacks are equivalent to 1890. Average Black wealth being around $17,000. To whites, $117,000 on the average. Read about the success of Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma in the early 1920s, and then the massacre of 300 men, women, and children, and the destruction of over 1,000 homes, of businesses and buildings, all destroyed by mobs of angry whites. Think about how you feel about education, where we as a county are spending 50% of a nearly $6 billion budget, and we still have disparities in graduation rates and equal access to our incredible public education system. How you feel about Black communities spending between 50 and 60% of their income for housing, and where a family of four would need between $75,000 and $90,000 to live in this community without subsidies. And how you feel about a police officer who is a white male that can place his knee to the neck of a Black man who is handcuffed from behind and has his face in the concrete sidewalk, pleading to be able to breathe. In that moment, the white officer postures himself as to look around and then down at the Black man to illustrate that he is still in dominance over him. And why? And my friends, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, our society, our religious community, and our racism gave him permission and the authority. There's indeed a lot that is not right. Where do you stand? To focus on the marginalized is going to be heavy lifting and a long-term commitment. The payoff? The payoff. Folks, can you imagine a world, a country, a state, even our county, being a nurturing community, not vested in anything unusual, but just the basics. And for the body of believers, a requirement of our faith that we love one another as we love ourselves, that we treat one another as we desire to be treated. And in that space, what problems can we not solve? What barriers can we not remove? What ills can we not eliminate? And what heights can we not climb as a society? Dr. King called this the beloved community. So this morning, I would hope that you hear, without indictment, but perspective, on how we move beyond to only focus on the marginalized, to act in a way that we uplift the marginalized. Here in the county, we're embarking upon a racial equity and social justice program. And the way that's going to work, or at least is set out to work, is that as we in fact look at issues of new laws that are being suggested and proposed by county council, that procedures and process that are in place to in fact carry out and implement laws and other kinds of guidelines from the county. And all budgets for which are allocated to in fact carry through these various proposals go through what we are calling a racial equity lens. How does this impact the racial equity of Montgomery County? And part of that will also include looking at issues like social justice, but race will be the primary. So what does that look like, Jim Stowe? What that looks like is this, that if we're trying to solve a problem in this community by introducing new laws, by making sure then that we have procedures and regulations that support those laws, and making sure we have resources, budget assigned to those particular tasks, that the end result allows us to be successful for everyone. Example, if we're trying to mitigate the scourge right now, folks, of health disparities, and the one that I use that often is the issue of diabetes, is running rampant in the Black community. It's a problem in the Asian community, by the way. Also a problem in the Latino community, and a problem in the white community. And we've been giving equal shares of resources to the problem, and we've not been able to really beat it yet, to really make inroads that are meaningful and are long lasting. So in this instance, if we really want to solve the problem, does it not make sense then to put more resources in where the greatest incident of the issue actually is occurring, in that part of the community? My answer would be yes. But Jim, what that means then is that we're not increasing the overall amount of resources going to this problem. We're just reallocating that. And is the white community going to be okay with that? Is the Asian community going to be okay with that? What about the Latino community? But wait a minute, are we not trying to solve the overall problem? Real heavy lifting. And Ann referred to this as I shared with them. I'm concerned that the answer is that yes, the white community will have a problem with this. Yes, the Latino community will have a problem with this. Yes, the Asian community will have a problem with this. Because resources will be sent to places where others may believe it may not be either deserved or being done fairly or being done in a way for which serves the greater good from their perspective, from their interest point. And so we will have to learn how to work this through, how to work it out. I've already shared with you that we're going to change the numbers from a demographic perspective pretty soon. 2035, some of us on this particular program this morning will see 2035. You will see the United States of America will be quite different than it exists today. A majority minority nation. And so does it not make sense then to find ways to work these critical issues out? We're struggling right now with the issue of what we do with education, what we do then with AP classes as an example, with foreign language opportunities for our students. How do we figure out who goes where? We only have a limited number of slots. How do we take 163,000 students and fairly and equitably allow them to have access to those resources? How do you figure that out? A huge challenge right now before our public school system, which we are so very proud of, and we do in fact spend so many resources toward. How do we look at that? And employment, we're right now about 6.9% unemployment in Montgomery County. Not in the great scheme of things, crazy like it is in other places across this country. But nonetheless, the greatest percentage of those unemployed are Black folks. Latinos, Asians, and whites about the same right now, as far as it's concerned. Always beyond the limits, that marginalized heading. And so therein lies another opportunity then to look at how do we in fact then increase this? How do we in fact move and shift the dime from where it is then to someplace else? And so in looking at these things, what I was trying to share means then that those 5 things that are so important that you engage in and become expert in and become then committed to allows us all to be at a place where might we be able then to make meaningful difference. Last thing I'll say is this, and we'll open up for Q&A. Why are we talking about this subject as persons of belief, people who believe in 2020? Why is the church talking about this issue in 2020? Why is it that we in our place and space still, within our own personhood, struggle with the issue of race, issue of difference, issue of economic standing? Should we not be at a different place in the evolution of our faith belief? Should we not be able to say and point out and be that shining example, the light on the hill that shows others the great work of our Lord and our Savior? How is it that we're at the same place? And all you got to do, my friends, is just go back and read. Understanding your own history, you've learned a lot of things about St. John's Episcopal Church, where you started. Why are we talking about this now? I'm sorry. Why are we still talking about this now? So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, and I certainly pray for you at St. John's that you not only will continue this beyond your actual period for which you formalize your 12-week process, and then these 6 focus points, these 6 pillars of faith belief, that they not only become then what you do in this season, that they become part of your permanent commitment. And wherever your on ramp is, and some of you even got an off ramp, while you're there in this moment, I would pray then that your example, your participation, your commitment might move us to a place where we in fact can see incredible possibilities. I'm hoping for that day. I'm praying for that day. And I try to work in you every day that you've given me as the director of the Office of Human Rights to do all I can in that capacity to make a difference. Thank you very much.
Wow. Jim, thank you so much. That was a powerful and compelling, and I'd say inspiring presentation. Thank you. And I really want to get quickly to questions. But I did want to just comment that we're here this morning because we are a community that wants to make a difference. We are a community that's working towards an ability to take a stand and engage at the level of the county. And I do want to get some specific ideas from you on that. But I'd also like to comment that I appreciate that you started by telling us we need to listen and learn. It's not a way to deflect us from action, but I know, at least in my personal life, that I have discovered how much I don't know, that I need to know, that I should know about the lived experience of being Black in America, for one thing. And so your admonition that we should speak with people and ask and learn is really important. But also, there's so many things we just don't know about history, Black history in America. When I went, some people on this Zoom call know that I've told this story before. When I went to visit my sister in Tulsa 2 or 3 years ago, she took me to the site of the Tulsa massacre, and I was shocked and sorrowful that I never knew that story. And I'm the product of great liberal arts institutions at the graduate and undergraduate level, and worked in a profession for years, and I didn't know that. And I didn't know how many other massacres took place elsewhere in the United States. I didn't know until our archivists dug into it what the roots of St. John's were. And another parishioner, Jay Mallon, I think he's on the call, is working on the lynchings that took place in Montgomery County. And you told us that Silver Spring was a sundown community. I never knew that. I mean, there's just too many things we don't know. And when we learned them, then the message you delivered to us this morning becomes even more compelling. There's no way people of faith can't heal the part of the body that's hurt, because the body suffers as a whole, and our society will continue to suffer if we don't address these issues. So with that, I'd like to just ask if you could point us, for purposes of thinking about it, to the kinds of things we could actually do. Our kind of faith community located where we are in this county, looking at the kinds of issues that are going to come up in the context of implementing the racial equity portion of the racial equity and social justice program. Are there some specific things you advise us to explore?
There is one thing going on now. Our Department of Park and Planning is engaged in finalizing. They'll be producing this report, I believe, sometime in February. But they're looking at a comprehensive plan. They'll look at the next 30 years of development in Montgomery County.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, it won't be the document that will be some sort of measure by which it cannot be amended and certainly given some additional support and information to as things change. But it will be the guidepost, if you will. It will be the landscape for which people have to then figure out or work through. So as they look at then what Montgomery County will look like in 30 years. So it is one process by which St. John's voice ought to be part of that discussion. You can invite people from the park and planning, invite one of the commissioners to become part of that process. And so that you have a chance to have them may come do a presentation for, again, a group of folks at St. John's. So I think that's one way you can get involved and get engaged in meaningful kinds of ways. We're also engaging in two other processes. One is reimagining law enforcement.
Yes. Yes.
And that process I'm a part of, and a great opportunity then to kind of zero in on one area where there continues to be ongoing conflicts and tensions. And they are historical. They're not necessarily things that happened yesterday, and not certainly with the most recent issues that have come up with death by police amongst a lot of Americans across this country, Black Americans specifically. But it is a chance to look at what we do and how we do it. And so I would encourage you to be part of that process. And you can do so by calling Caroline Sturgis. She is the assistant county administrator, one of the assistants, and become part of the discussion. And if we had a point in time and place where you believe then that you can't participate, and only if it's just being aware of this going on, when those reports come out, seek them out, because there will be, again, a final report of that group's work sometime in February, because again, right, the county executive wants to impact the FY21 budget with recommendations that come out of that report. So I would encourage you to be part of that as well. Very meaningful. There's also discussion going on right now called Black and Brown engagement in our education system. This is a coalition of Black and Latino communities looking at the various gaps that continue to exist in Montgomery County Public Schools and the administering of education system. It is a tremendous effort on behalf of citizens who pull together and put this together. This is not government created at all, nor government led, which I think is great, but provides an opportunity to look at these issues. And even though they may not be your children, they are in fact all of our children, regardless of what race or background they may come from. Our vested interest in our own future is in them. And so you need to be part of that discussion. And so when those public discussions come out, and one just was had about 2 weeks ago, you know, St. John's needs to be on those calls. It needs to be, again, a voice to be heard and a voice to be, again, uplifted. St. John's could also host itself a webinar, a town hall that you invite the community, lets you then lead the way, as it were, on these issues. Wow. And pull together various faith communities. You're already working with one, I understand, right now, in the AME Church, which is fantastic. But again, you spearhead this particular webinar. You spearhead this particular town hall. Let's get the religious community together, and you take that leadership. Need not wait on anybody else. And so that is a very practical, very doable thing today that you all could plan and think about how you put it in place. So that could happen immediately, because I'm sharing with you, and I'm so disappointed. And they may have been going on, again, in individual congregations and places of worship. We never had a prayer for over 230,000 Americans that were killed and are being killed on a daily basis with COVID-19. There's never been a county-wide prayer. Goodness gracious, it's a staple of what we do is prayer. But we had no leadership. And I'm just straight up this morning, folks, and I apologize for being so passionate, but I am. When did we do this? Goodness gracious, that's our wheel, our station, right?
Right.
We ought to be doing that better than anybody else, but nobody. There may have been, again, those doing it in their own congregations. I'm sure that probably was happening, but nobody called for county-wide prayer, because we had people dying in our own communities for which we didn't use the basic strength that all of us have in the body of believers. We believe in this universal thing that brings us together and petitions our Father in heaven, that we can come together in ways that we pull the strength and the love that comes from that coming together and lifting up our petition to him. We failed at the one thing that is fundamental to all of us. Goodness gracious. And so it seems to me that when we tackle something like what we're talking about this morning, wow, we got to have our stuff together. We got to be really ready to do it. So I'm thinking in terms of, that's what you can do. And again, that just bothered me so much. And I called around and trying to get people engaged in it. And it just seemed like nobody was interested. I said, wow, goodness gracious. Goodness gracious. And so I think that's critically important as we go through. We are going to have, of course, with this election coming up, we're going to have another possible look at how we do county government. You may have know about the issues that were on the ballot this time around. And I must say, before I finish this, I know I'm going to say it anyway. If you have not voted, vote. Obviously, if you know somebody who's not voted, remind him or her to do likewise. But on the ballot was an issue about either expanding or redoing county government in terms of representation. Either going to all districts, where you have then all members of council representing a very specific district within the county itself, or do another combination where you have at-large members and also district members. And then what's your position on that? How do you feel about that? Because that, again, is a chance for leadership in ways that examine, I think, from a spiritual perspective, what you think about your community. So, Ann, and to all of you on the phone, I keep saying phone, on this Zoom call today, those are some practical things I think that can be done. Don't take a whole lot of wherewithal to get them done. It does take commitment. It does take an ongoing desire to be engaged. And I'm particularly excited about the one that you're hosting something. Yeah. Hosting this kind of call for, if nothing else, within your own particular, what's the proper term for those who are under your umbrella?
Congregation, parish, diocese.
The diocese, I think, is the Greater Washington, D.C. area, right? But, yes, but various parishes, I think is what I was trying to get to, yes, here in Montgomery County. That you all sponsor something, that you all be engaged in this, and then spread the word that's going on. So we as a community know and see and have evidence that this is serious, that you all engage in this process. So I think those are a few ideas off the top of my head that I think are important that can be done and then can be engaged in. And just stay in contact with. You know, one thing that has never happened, as I recall, is county council does things like proclamations and resolutions all the time. And that may yet be another way of a public pronouncement of some engagement that St. John's is putting forward, and that you're asking for a resolution in support of this activity, as an example. That puts it on the record of the county government of this particular community, that it's important enough for it to be recognized in that kind of way. So those are ways, again, that don't cost anything. That just means action.
Those are amazing suggestions. Thank you so much. I know that we're going to take a hard look at them and find a way forward on, well, we can certainly do a prayer service, but all the other things you mentioned as well. So since we're down to 10 minutes, Jim, I'm not going to ask any more questions. I want to open it up and let the people listening here have their chance. And Bill, are you there? Will you assist me in that process?
Yeah, and maybe I'll draw on a couple of questions that Julia Andrews has posed on the chat. Mr. Stowe, I first of all appreciate your comments about the question is about racial integration in our schools in Montgomery County, and the program you highlighted. Appreciate your comment about that. I wonder if we could build on that, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the, and I'll confess I'm not terribly well informed on this topic, but I know there's been conversations about redistricting in Montgomery County. And I was struck by your comment about the determination of your zip code having such a great influence on your opportunities. I'm wondering if you could share your perspective on the redistricting and what bearing might that have on creating more equity based on where you are in the county.
It was a discussion that you may know got really passionate, got really heated all across Montgomery County. It all came down to who's going to school with who, but more importantly, what people thought they were going to lose if, in fact, districts were drawn in a different kind of way. And it only points out again that when we start to think in terms of a move, an action, a position impacting us directly, our most liberal thinking seems to go out the window, because now you're talking about mine. And that's what's happening right now on this subject of redistricting. It's something we have not done, by the way, in years. So it is time. We're not the same, school system, nor are we the same county we were then 20 years ago. And so you have to look at things again and try to figure out how we need to best shape and form and allocate our resources. It just makes sense. But what it does is, like I mentioned early on with the issue of how we deal with social equity, racial equity rather than social justice, it's going to be different for so many of us. And what I said in my comments, this is not about losing anything. It's about how we gain something, how we improve for the benefit of all of our community. And so in that instance, there's got to be ways for which we can find differences. And so if we move a line this way or that way, and maybe we may, and as a result of that, have to think differently about how we accomplish the same results, the same level of success. That's what it means. And so I would hope then that as we sort of figure that out and finish that process, that what we end up saying to ourselves is that every district ought to be one for which fulfills the requirements of each and every student in those districts, regardless of whether or not he or she may look like him or her, or think like him or her, or believe like him or her. But they are part of our community. That ought to be the goal. That's how we fix that problem. So regardless of how we shift the lines, you still get the quality education that you deserve in this community and we all want for our children. And so I think that's the mindset that we've got to have, instead of the mindset that says, if you do this, students now who are on free and reduced lunch come to my particular district. And so therefore, that's going to mean certain kinds of things that are different than what I had before. We got to drop that kind of thinking. And this is again where the body of believers have got to be amongst those who illustrate and model the behavior that we're talking about. They can't be among those who are shouting the loudest because it involves their kid. Got to fix that. Either you're in, you're out. You can't be lukewarm, as he said in the Bible, as you well know. He spewed them out in Laodicea because they were neither what? Hot or cold, but rather lukewarm. And so we need a fully functioning body of believers to illustrate and demonstrate and model the behavior in this county that we need to have happen, in my opinion.
I think Mark
Thank
had
you.
his hand up, Bill.
Mark, go ahead. Would you like to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, I think I just succeeded in doing that. So thank you very much for a very inspiring conversation. This is really going to give us some additional energy in moving forward in some of these areas. I try to work with the social justice group here at St. John's on healthcare and racial equality in healthcare, and we've already met with Council Member Albornoz and brought up that issue, and we followed up with Tiffany Ward and talked to her about some of these measures. And I follow what's going on with the Montgomery County Council on their Committee on Health and Human Services.
Excellent.
And I was very interested in your discussion of the, some diseases run rampant in the Black community disproportionately. And so it seems to make sense to me that we would reallocate resources to where the need is greater, because that's where you'll do the most good, and you'll thereby promote racial equity and social justice. And I'd be very interested in following up with you on specific ways in which we could do that. We're prepared to be advocates in this area, and we need to be more aware of what positions are being developed and what issues are being raised, and how best to engage.
Excellent, Mark. I appreciate that very much indeed. To give you a more real example, in some of the zip codes that I talked about, I'm a member of the African American Health Program, which is a part of HHS, and looks specifically at issues within the Black community. And recently, data would suggest then that I, as a Black man, were I to live in those particular zip codes, I am subject to 7 years, 5 to 7 years, in terms of my death rate, if you will, in those zip codes. And so if I live there, I may end up living 5 to 7 years less than my white counterparts in those same zip codes. And I got great health insurance, right? And so I'm saying to you that indicative of the environment, I mean, all kinds of issues are locked up in there. So I look forward, Mark, to your reach out, and be more than glad to go along with you in that particular pursuit, because I think it's critically important that folks are engaged in that process, because I'm looking for, as a member of this community, the overall success of all of us. Because if I solve a problem of significance in one place, it has to have an impact someplace else.
Right.
Positive impact.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions and comments, Bill?
I'll offer one more from the chat. So, Mr. Stowe, I wonder if you could, I think you may have spoke to this briefly, but on the topic of police reform, maybe you can share. I think there is some programs that we've actually had some dialogue with the police force in certain members of the parish. Can you elaborate maybe on what's going on with the Montgomery County Police Department in terms of racial equity?
Yes. Chief Jones, by the way, if you don't know him, that's another thing and you can do is invite him to come to St. John's and have a dialogue with, as I'm having with you this morning, invite him.
Okay.
And you could have that direct conversation with Chief Jones, who would be very receptive to that opportunity, by the way. So one of the issues we continue to run in really with a bit of a challenge with is how, well, first of all, we had a webinar with all of the various law enforcement chiefs in Montgomery County. And it was a marvelous opportunity to hear from them, including the sheriff of our county was part of that group as well. And one of the things that many of them said, and that particular member, Tony Duvall, who's over in, we're trying to think of, Tacoma Park, echoed again by also the chief in Gaithersburg, also the chief in Rockville. First and foremost, we got to hire the right people. You got to hire the right police officer in the very, very beginning. And so we're really looking at and evaluating what that hiring and recruitment mechanism looks like. That, in fact, allows us then to have the kind of police force, to the extent that we can, that does resemble best the community that they serve. And so one of the things that Chief Jones has talked about is how do we do that better in Montgomery County? So then that the issues that we come up with are issues, in fact, that we can deal with in ways that are effective for those given communities. He's also been one of these people who's already been able to admit and looks forward to addressing concerns that he believes firmly that the police are not really qualified to do, and particularly some of the crisis interventions been occurring around mental health.
Right.
And so he's looking then at how we can, in fact, invest and bring into the police force those supporting services that may be outside of the police force that can come and be a partner with on these kinds of calls that often come up where it is a no-win situation for the police officer. He or she is totally unprepared, regardless of the training that we get or suggested that they get. It still is not like someone who does this on a daily basis in terms of interventions for people who may be in episode. And so it's another area that he's going to be able to pull together, and he is part of that reimagining process is just that. What reimagining does not mean is removing investment and funding from the police.
Right.
That is not something that he, in fact, is certainly suggesting, nor is Mark Elridge suggesting that, nor members of council. So be clear about that as well. We're not talking about that, but what we are saying is that if there are activities and services for which they're not qualified to do, then why continue to ask them to do that when we end up producing the kind of results that sometimes are ending in loss of life? That is not a winning situation for anybody. So I think in terms of how it's going to apply to his shop is hiring the right person from an equity standpoint, making sure we got people who represent the people that in fact we serve, looking at ways to look at diversification of the services that police provide, which ones are appropriate, which ones are not, which ones lend themselves to partnering with others. And on the other side of this is working directly with the community. As a matter of fact, there'll be a new assistant police chief hired. They'll do nothing but engage with community, look at policy and process, and be the public relations arm for the police department. They're looking for someone who is not a police necessarily, a seasoned person. Someone who does have some police experience would be great. But the idea is that there's going to be a civilian, if you will, in the role of as assistant police chief that has a responsibility of improving the rapport between communities of color and the police department and communities just in general. And so those are steps that, again, Chief Jones is taking. And I think you'll just see more as this rolls out in that February report. I look forward to that coming out from the county executive's office.
Great. Thank you. Bill, do we have time for one more, or are we over time?
Well, I know we're at noon, but I think maybe we'll take one more. So Jay, you had a comment you posted in the chat. Would you like to speak to that?
Sorry, Bill, I thought you'd read it. Jim,
Yes.
you mentioned the zip code disparities, which are so important. Montgomery County is partly still a segregated county for historical reasons, though that's been maintained up to the present day. Do you see a need for an end to segregation in the county, and how could we, if so, how would we work about that?
We tried with moderately priced units, MPDUs, as part of the process of trying to diversify our developments and requiring developers to utilize that as a way, not only bring in racial kinds of shift in demographics, but also economic. And quite frankly, we've got a situation where it doesn't really help us at all to move to that point, because you got places in the area that many of you may live in, Bethesda or Chevy Chase, where then if you're trying to become part of a new condo development, what have you, you can't pay the condo fees. And so what ends up happening is that they really become places that you will never be able to get into if you're somebody who needs some sort of subsistence or some sort of subsidy to be able to afford those places. And so as a result of that, they will stay always homogeneous, in my opinion. And what's been happening to many from the development standpoint is that they have got resources invested in that development. They can't sell them. They can't move them because, again, trying to reach the county's requirement for low and moderately priced income kinds of units to be available. And they can't sell them because people can't move in them because they can't afford fees associated with living in those places. They're stuck then with those investments. So they, in fact, end up buying out those responsibilities from jurisdictions. And so you end up having a homogeneous unit anyway. And so it's going to be a real difficult thing for us to do in terms of ending segregation until we get to a point where we believe then that there ought to be places in our communities where every person has a right to live. We have challenges in doing so because it's expensive to live in our county. It just is. That's the fact. And so we got to be more creative in how we do that. We're still trying to figure that one out, Jay. I'm not so sure we have answers today about how it's going to happen. But what I do know is this. I do know that housing is a place for which everything emanates from. You cannot get a job if you don't have an address, right? You don't have shelter for your children, for yourself, otherwise if you don't have a house or a place to live, a place that you're calling home. It's fundamental. And so it goes back again to mindset. How to become with a mindset that says we need to find a way then to incorporate persons of varying backgrounds and so forth in our community in ways that make sense, in ways that are going to work, and be okay with that. And be okay with that. That's part of the problem. Problem is that we're not okay with that. It's still, in many instances, not in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. That's still real. And so we've got to get beyond that point. And here's the thing we got to be able to understand, right? And I love your term. I'm going to use that, by the way. I'm stealing that, by the way, Ann. So please put that out there. I'm stealing your on-ramp analogy because I think it's fantastic. But at any rate, everybody does not desire what I've been talking about this morning. A lot of people don't. It just, either it's not important, either it is not a core value that they have within themselves. And so therefore, it's just not even on the radar. And so I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought that people want a fully integrated community. I would hope the majority of us in Montgomery County want this, right? Because we are a progressive county, right? And so the mindset's got to change. We got to move to a different place. It is interesting, by the way, and I'm looking for those people of faith, and I'm actually looking at you here to help me out a little bit. Bethesda, my understanding it means the healing pool. Isn't that interesting?
House of healing, house of healing.
House of healing, thank you.
House of healing, yeah, that's right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
And so as we look at this whole issue, we've got to be real clear that we have got to desire a different place and how we see that place. Then we talk about how we integrate in this community. And we'll see, by the way, in short order, how well we do under the new umbrella of racial equity. We'll see. We'll see.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Jim. It's just.
And if I can, real quickly, I got homework.
Sure. Oh, yes, homework. Okay.
I got homework.
We're ready.
I want you to look up and learn about, I should say, the Devil's Punch Bowl. You might have heard of it? The Devil's Punch Bowl. Natchez, Mississippi. Take a look at it.
Okay.
And if you think you know about the origin of Holocaust in the world, stay tuned. You'll be educated very differently about a Holocaust that occurred right here in the United States of America. The Devil's Punch Bowl.
Okay.
If you have not read the famous speech, July 4th, for Frederick Douglass, take a look at it. And if you will, do some substitution of some of the words in terms of from a timing standpoint and period standpoint, and see how well it overlays in 2020. Frederick Douglass speech. I'm going to send to you a young poet, young white poet, who speaks in very graphic language. Didn't want to bring it up this morning, but I do hope you do, and not offended by it, by the way. It's only like 2 or 3 minutes, but it's very authentic in his voice. I'm going to send it to Ann, and I hope you will listen to what he has to say and not be some another setback off because of the language that he's going to use. But he, in fact, expresses this view of how we are in the world. And then the last piece I'm going to send is what I shared with Ann and also with Lisa about a historian, Dave Rothstein. I think I got his name close to being right. But at any rate, who's done a look at Silver Spring and its origin and its history, which also touches a little bit on Chevy Chase and Bethesda. But it looks at us. I'm going to send those to her to allow you to take a look at those items. And then hopefully that will give you some additional help and understanding about where we are here in the county, as well as where we are from a historical perspective that has guided us to this point and place in time as we are today. So anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's really timely information. Let me just say, for the benefit of the group still on the Zoom, that we're planning an education series in the Lenten period. It's the Sacred Ground series that the Episcopal Church has put together, which looks at the history of this issue. And it's a very important education, but it's a national one. So having these resources about our local community will be a great addition to that. So let me thank you again, Jim, and I hope we can stay in dialogue with you as we continue this exploration of these important issues. And thanks to everybody who joined us this morning and made this such a wonderful.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you indeed. Thank you so much.
And God bless.
And God bless all of you.
Especially next week.
Yes.
Okay.
Vote, vote, vote.
Vote, right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.